Before we begin, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because stories like this take time, research, and honesty, and you won't want to miss what comes next. Some bands break up quietly, fading into history with polite explanations and softened memories. Others leave scars so deep that decades later, the pain still echoes louder than the music. The Eagles belong firmly in the second category. Their story is often told through flawless harmonies, chart-topping records, and sold-out arenas. But behind that polished image was a slow-burning conflict that never truly went away. What began as small disagreements slowly evolved into personal wars, power struggles, and emotional exhaustion that would permanently change the lives of everyone involved. The tragedy of the Eagles is not that they failed, but that they succeeded so massively that the pressure crushed the very bond that created them. This is not a story about villains and heroes. It's a story about ambition, ego, fear, control, and the human cost of chasing perfection for too long. When Glenn Frey and Don Henley first crossed paths while playing in Linda Ronstadt's backing band in 1971, neither could have predicted what they were about to build. They weren't just chasing fame, they were chasing identity. Both men shared a hunger to create something lasting, something that could stand shoulder to shoulder with the biggest acts of the era. When Bernie Leadon and Randy Meisner joined them, the chemistry felt effortless. There was a sense of equality, a belief that every voice mattered. Their early sound blended country warmth with rock ambition, creating something familiar yet fresh. Audiences connected instantly. Songs like "Take It Easy" didn't just play on the radio, they became emotional companions for a generation. Success came quickly, almost too quickly. With every hit record, expectations rose, and with those expectations came invisible cracks that no one wanted to acknowledge. As the Eagles climbed higher between 1972 and 1975, the internal balance began to shift. Glenn Frey naturally took charge, driven by instinct and an unrelenting desire to control outcomes. Don Henley supported that direction, believing leadership was necessary to survive the industry. But Bernie Leadon felt increasingly displaced. He had envisioned the Eagles as a musically grounded, country-folk collective, not a polished rock powerhouse. Each album pulled the band further from his roots. The more commercial they became, the more he felt like a stranger inside his own creation. Studio sessions turned tense. Creative debates stopped being discussions and became quiet resentments. By 1975, the pressure reached its breaking point. During one heated moment, Leadon poured a beer over Frey's head and walked away, signaling that something fundamental had snapped. His departure wasn't just about music. It was about exhaustion, loss of identity, and feeling unheard. The first fracture had finally become visible. Joe Walsh's arrival brought new energy, but also new complications. His raw guitar style pushed the Eagles deeper into hard rock territory, helping shape what would become Hotel California. On the surface, it was a creative triumph. Beneath it, the band was running on fumes. Everyone was tired. Touring schedules were brutal, and personal lives barely existed. Success no longer felt exciting. It felt mandatory. Walsh fit musically, but emotionally, the group was already strained. Instead of healing old wounds, his presence highlighted how much the band had changed from its early days. The Eagles were no longer a group of equals chasing a dream together. They were a machine, expected to perform perfectly every night, regardless of cost. No one felt that cost more deeply than Randy Meisner. Quiet, sensitive, and deeply musical, Meisner was never built for confrontation. While Frey thrived under pressure, Meisner collapsed under it. Years of touring destroyed his health. Ulcers, anxiety, and vocal strain made performing physically painful. "Take It to the Limit," the song that defined his contribution, became a source of dread rather than pride. By 1977, his body and mind were failing him. During a concert in Knoxville, when the audience demanded that song again, Meisner simply couldn't do it. Backstage, Glenn Frey exploded. What Frey saw as professionalism, Meisner experienced as cruelty. The argument turned physical, and the damage was permanent. Meisner later admitted that moment broke him. Soon after, he walked away, leaving behind not just the band, but the version of himself he once believed in. Meisner's exit marked a turning point. With him gone, the Eagles lost their emotional center. The structure became rigid, dominated by Frey and Henley. Don Felder, who had joined earlier, watched everything carefully. He admired their leadership at first, but over time he realized the truth. This was no longer a partnership. It was a hierarchy. Felder's breaking point came during the making of Hotel California. He believed he had been promised a lead vocal on Victim of Love. Instead, while he was away, Henley re-recorded the vocals without telling him. The betrayal cut deep. Trust evaporated. Felder stopped seeing himself as a valued member and started seeing himself as disposable. From that moment on, the band was standing on a fault line. By 1980, the tension was unbearable. During a political fundraiser in Long Beach, a small exchange triggered an explosion years in the making. A casual comment from Felder was interpreted as disrespect by Frey. On stage, the two men exchanged threats while playing in front of thousands. The audience could feel it. The hatred was no longer hidden. When the show ended, the Eagles were effectively finished. They fulfilled their obligations, but the brotherhood was gone. What followed was silence, exhaustion, and emotional wreckage. When the Eagles reunited in 1994 under the name Hell Freezes Over, fans believed it was about healing. In reality, it was about business. Money replaced forgiveness. Frey and Henley controlled the structure. Others became employees. Don Felder felt betrayed once again. By 2001, he was fired. Lawsuits followed, sealing the band's legacy in bitterness rather than peace. Glenn Frey's death in 2016 closed one chapter, but unresolved pain remained. Randy Meisner's death in 2023 reopened old wounds. The music lives on, but the unity does not. The Eagles became legends, but their story remains a warning. Power can destroy what harmony creates. Even after the explosive breakup in 1980, the damage didn't end when the stage lights went dark. Each former member carried the Eagles with them like an unresolved argument that never stopped echoing. Glenn Frey and Don Henley pursued solo careers, publicly successful yet privately burdened by the weight of unfinished business. Interviews from that period reveal guarded language, careful phrasing, and a refusal to fully address the emotional wreckage left behind. They spoke of creative differences, but rarely of the personal pain. Meanwhile, Randy Meisner disappeared almost completely from the public eye. Fame had never suited him, and without the structure of the band, his health and confidence continued to decline. He struggled with anxiety, alcoholism, and isolation, becoming a quiet reminder of how success can abandon those it once celebrated. Don Felder, on the other hand, carried anger openly. He felt erased from the band's history, his contributions minimized, his voice silenced. For him, the Eagles weren't just a band that broke up, they were a promise that was never honored. The years apart didn't soften these feelings. They hardened them, allowing resentment to mature into something permanent. When the reunion finally happened in the mid-1990s, the public narrative focused on nostalgia and redemption. Fans saw familiar faces sharing a stage again and assumed time had healed the wounds. Behind the scenes, the reality was colder. The reunion was structured like a corporation, not a family. Contracts were precise, power was centralized, and creative freedom was limited. Glenn Frey and Don Henley maintained firm control, justifying it as necessary for efficiency and consistency. Joe Walsh and Timothy B. Schmidt accepted the arrangement with quiet resignation. They understood the rules and chose stability over confrontation. Don Felder, however, felt deeply betrayed. He believed the spirit of equality promised years earlier had been completely abandoned. Each tour reinforced that belief. Decisions were made without his input, financial divisions favored the leadership, and communication grew distant. The Eagles were performing flawlessly on stage while emotionally disconnected behind it. It was a performance of unity rather than a reality. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction in 1998 should have been a moment of celebration, but instead it exposed how fractured the relationships truly were. Former and current members stood together for photographs, smiled for cameras, and delivered speeches that sounded respectful but hollow. Backstage, the atmosphere was tense and uncomfortable. There were no heartfelt reunions, no emotional reconciliations. Everyone understood that this was obligation, not closure. The band existed because the legacy demanded it, not because the bond had been repaired. This emotional distance only deepened the divide, particularly for Don Felder, who felt increasingly marginalized and disposable. The sense that he no longer belonged became impossible to ignore. The final break came in 2001, delivered not through conversation, but through a phone call. Felder was informed he was no longer part of the Eagles. No lengthy explanation, no attempt at mediation, just removal. For Felder, it was confirmation of everything he had feared. He responded with a lawsuit that exposed years of internal conflict, power imbalance, and financial disputes. Court documents painted a picture far darker than fans had ever imagined. Accusations flew from both sides, turning private grievances into public spectacle. While the case was eventually settled, the emotional consequences were irreversible. Whatever chance remained for reconciliation vanished in legal paperwork and sealed agreements. The Eagles continued, but something essential had been lost forever. As the years passed, the band transformed into an institution rather than a living, evolving group. Tour became larger, productions more polished, and performances more precise. Yet many longtime fans noticed something missing. The warmth, the shared joy, the sense of collective spirit that once defined the Eagles had faded. Glenn Frey's death in 2016 marked a profound turning point. His passing was mourned worldwide, and Don Henley described him as a brother, partner, and creative equal. For a moment, it seemed like reflection might finally bring peace. Instead, the band continued, now featuring Frey's son Deacon alongside Vince Gill. Some saw it as tribute. Others saw it as further evidence that the Eagles had become a brand that could survive any loss. Randy Meisner's final years were quiet and deeply sad. Living far from the spotlight, he battled chronic illness and isolation. When he passed away in 2023, tributes acknowledged his talent, but the emotional distance was impossible to ignore. Meisner had been there at the beginning, yet history often treated him as an afterthought. His story remains one of the most painful reminders of what happens when gentle souls are crushed by relentless pressure. Joe Walsh, now sober and reflective, has spoken openly about his struggles, admitting that while the Eagles elevated his career, they also nearly destroyed him. Timothy B. Schmidt has remained gracious and reserved, choosing silence over reopening wounds. Even in recent years, the past refuses to stay buried. Don Henley's legal battles over handwritten lyrics reignited discussions about ownership, legacy, and control. Don Felder's interviews continue to reflect unresolved anger. He has made it clear that forgiveness will never come. The Eagles still fill arenas. Their songs still define generations. But behind every harmony is a story of ambition colliding with humanity. The music survived. The brotherhood did not. And that contrast is what makes the Eagles' story one of the most haunting in rock history.